Hello, I'm Alyssa Weinzimmer with Voice Body Connection and the online class How Your Voice Works. And today I am here to have a conversation with Lynn Hilton. Lynn, I'm so excited you're here. Lynn is a vocal coach and she is a performing arts medicine specialist, which is what we're going to be talking about specifically today. She also started a magazine, an online periodical called I Sing Magazine, which I think is how we got connected, Lynn, which is an incredible publication for singers, and has an online training for singing teachers called BAST, Be a Singing Teacher. So lots of expertise over here. Today we're going to talk about performing arts medicine and what people, singers or anyone who uses their voice needs to know about, going to see a doctor or a clinician. So Lynn, I'll just sort of give you a little prompt to jump off with, which is, if someone, for instance, me 10 years ago had an issue with my vocal cords, if someone has an issue with their voice, can tell that some sort of trauma has happened, or even is just concerned and wants to make sure that they're taking care of themselves vocally, what do they need to know about going to see doctors or clinicians?
Well, hi, and thanks very much for having me here.
Yes, thank you for being here.
You know what? The first thing is to understand that not all doctors are equal.
Yeah.
And certainly not when it comes to the singer and the performer. Many people who followed that pathway of becoming a general practitioner are just that. They're very good with the general things. And so when it comes to special areas or fields, they're a little bit more limited, but may not realise that. They may not understand it. So part of our role as the performer or singer is to help educate the people that are looking after us to understand there are certain requirements of the art or the job that may be outside of the usual spectrum of use of that particular joint or limb or organ, and in our case as singers, the voice. So quite often the general practitioner will say, well, you're talking okay. I don't understand what's wrong, and why can't you change the songs or change the key or sing in a different show or don't work this weekend, not realising it's actually, this is your livelihood, it's what drives you to get up every morning, and you can't change keys, that readily, especially with certain genres, that if this is, your contract and you're contracted to work 8 times a week, then you need to turn up, otherwise you might lose your job. That actually, you can't just have a rest because you might be a swing and you're the one that actually is filling in for everybody else, or it might be that it's the function band is relying on your voice to sing the songs that they need playing. So it's about educating how the voice is used or how the body is used when performing, which might mean a demonstration or a video, some way of helping the medical person understand what's entailed in using your voice or performing. So being aware that you going in and just panicking about whatever it is that you can't do for that moment is not going to be very helpful, that you need to probably explain a little bit more what it means to sing and using a different part of your vocal range to what you would use to talking, or the fact that you've got to jump up and down while singing, or carry certain props. The doctor's not going to know that automatically.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I think the very first thing really is just understanding that for the most part, the GP, who will probably be your first port of call, will not necessarily understand your job. And the other thing that I like to point out is that if you're not getting satisfaction, you can find someone else.
Right.
Look for somebody who actually will take the time, who is interested in actually helping you in your particular situation, and who may not understand it, but they know how to refer you on to the appropriate help.
Mm-hmm. Great. So that begs the next question for me, which is, so you're based in the UK and I'm here in New York City, and obviously people can have issues like this anywhere in the world, although we tend to be in two big hubs for performers. But if someone specifically needs, I constantly see on Facebook or wherever I'm looking, someone posting, oh, I need an ear, nose, and throat doctor who actually understands singers. Is there a resource people can go to find the right, performing arts medicine friendly specialist for them? Are there any resources you can recommend?
Well, in the UK, we have the British Voice Association, and they have a list of voice clinics. So basically, they're ENTs who put on a clinic specifically for voice users, professional voice users, or people who have specific voice issues, as opposed to the rest of the ENT the area region, which is the ears and the nose as well. So that's a starting point in the UK. The other thing is to obviously find somebody, so like say a singing teacher, or maybe there's a performing arts medicine organisation that's nearby that might have a list of voice clinics or ENTs that are specifically interested in working with performers. And then of course you can ring and ask the actual practice and say, look, this is my need, I'm a singer and I would really like somebody who is a vocalogist or laryngologist. Sorry, really the word there is laryngologist. So a laryngologist is someone who's done their basic ENT training and then gone on and done a fellowship for maybe about a year or so, studying with somebody who focuses on the larynx. There's also PAVA, the Pan American Vocology Association in the US, which would also have speech therapists or pathologists who could point you in the right direction. So there are a couple of places that you can go. The other place obviously is within your own network to talk to other singers who may already have had access to somebody that they'd recommend.
Yeah, because I know a lot of times, I have the list of people that I recommend. I've spent a lot of my career in LA and now in New York, so I have the list of people that I recommend in these places. But a lot of times it becomes an insurance issue here in the US about, oh, I can't go there because they don't take my insurance, and that's going to be a really expensive situation for me. So then I guess the question becomes, since there's really been a smaller percentage, really a much smaller percentage of clinicians who have become laryngologists or really spent time going down the performing arts medicine route and getting curious about performers, what are we doing on the clinical side of things to bring more clinicians on board? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I can't say that I'm specifically working on that side of thing other than from my little corner.
Sure. Well, and whatever you know about that, whatever you can share. So
I think I'm quite in sort of in what's the word? Sorry, my brain's a bit fuzzy today.
No worries.
I'm very encouraged by the fact that PAMA exists. So that's the Performing Arts Medicine Association. And they are trying to build awareness from within the fields, of that. It's not enough just to do the ENT, but you need to find out a lot more about what's entailed with these performers, and it's hard for the doctors themselves as well and the clinicians, because the arts is such a wide field, isn't it? Person could be acting, they could be jumping from the trapeze, they could be having to sing underwater. I mean, there's just,
I want to see that show.
Yeah, right. Bizarre things that people have to deal with. Well, I mean, I say that because I once worked on an advert for a Perrier water or something like that, where they decided in their wisdom to have it all filmed underwater, and people had to talk and act underwater. And all sorts of things happened. They got chlorine in their eyes, and then they swallowed chlorine, and all sorts of things ensued as a result. So weird stuff happens. Now I lost track. Oh yeah, so PAMA is definitely on the move to help educate not only the performers, but also clinicians and medical people on what's entailed in working with performers, as is PAVA, as is the BVA. And I know in Australia, there is the Australian Teachers Association also are trying to bridge those gaps as well. But I think a lot of it has to come from us, the performers, where we're just demanding that knowledge and expertise, and encouraging the people that we meet along the way, you know, through various medical appointments, to take a little bit of time to understand what's entailed. But it is a very slow growing area. I mean, it's not like sports medicine, which took off very quickly. There's a lot more money involved in sports in general. And of course, there's the national pride that comes with winning gold, etc. With performers, but I feel like, especially in the commercial world, given the amount of money that they can make off some of the artists, I feel like maybe the music industry needs to be taking a lot more responsibility on that side. And there's, you know, there's music cares and the musicians union. They're all trying to help build these bridges a little bit, but it just takes time.
Yeah, it makes me think, you know, so something that's been very heartening for me over the last couple of years is to see more elite musicians or performers coming forward and saying, I had an issue with my voice. Adele, for instance, Sam Smith, you know, Michael Bublé, just to see people being public about that, because I think that there's a taboo, right? That, you know, oh, it's my voice and it's my identity. It's so tied up with my identity, and it shouldn't ever fail me because this is, you know, I should be able to do it perfectly. But exactly like you make the comparison to sports medicine, we understand really clearly that athletes can and will injure themselves. And there's a lot of resources that go into that. And I think maybe the challenge with performing arts medicine is that, like you're saying, we need to be our own advocates. And I think a lot of doctors are spending so much of their time taking people from pathology to normal function, right? I mean, that's basically what the medical institutions tend to be about around the world, is how do we take someone from disease to health? But performers are coming in and saying, I want to go from health to optimum function, or perhaps, you know, slightly suboptimal normal function to normal function. And so it's easy for a doctor to look at what's going on and say, well, that's fine. There's no problem with what's going on with your vocal cords. You can use them like any normal person uses them. But then you have to, like you said at the beginning, raise your hand and say, actually, I don't use my vocal cords like a normal person. I rely on them for my career and my profession. And I use them, you know, so much more than other people do. So, so getting our own education, really, right? And this is actually something, part of the reason I started to get really tuned into this and interested was Vibrant Voice Technique, the project that you and I actually met through, which is the vibrators for your voice stuff, right? And it's a similar thing with using a vibrator for your voice. A lot of times we're actually working with people who are using vibration to take themselves from normal function to optimum. And another interesting thing to say about that is, even when we started doing research around using the vibrators for your voice and how to measure it, the measures that exist in the clinical world around speech pathology, around, you know, what is a healthy voice, there's not a lot of measures that exist that can measure what it is to take yourself from normal to optimum. It's basically just, you know, we can look at jitter, we can look at shimmer, which is the variance in volume or pitch, in utterance or in a sustained phonation, and say, okay, if, you know, the jitter and the shimmer is too far off, then that's pathological, we could say, although there's even conversation now around whether that truly is indicative of pathology. We can look at the harmonics to noise ratio and say how much noise is in someone's sound versus, you know, regular vibration. But those measures don't give us a ton of information when we're going from normal to optimum. And it becomes very much an issue of just relying upon perceptual measures and saying, you know, that sounds better to me. I can perceive and hear more resonance in that sound. Anything you would add to all of that?
Well, I think it is very subjective as well.
Mm-hmm.
Because what might seem really optimum to one person may actually be suboptimum to the other.
Right. That's such a good point.
And it's not even, you know, a case of, you know, what do you measure? It's like, how do we figure out what needs measuring, given that they don't know the full parameters of the voice, and you know, we can only see from the top. We don't know what's happening underneath. We don't really know exactly what's happening. You know, we can measure pressure, but we don't necessarily know the exact movement that's going on underneath and the pressure is doing to the vocal folds. We don't know what's happening inside the vocal folds as much as we might like to, you know, because in order
like
to
in the deeper layers, you mean?
Yeah, because in order to do that, you have to put a needle in, and like how many, you know, so singers are going to allow someone to plonk a needle into those tiny little muscles. There's so many questions. I mean, another person who's really been great at helping to build these bridges is, of course, Dr. Ingo Tietze.
Yeah.
And what they're doing at the National Centre for Voice and Speech. And, you know, in trying to figure out what kind of instruments can we use for measurement, are there things that we could actually maybe introduce a singing teacher, a voice teacher to use as a way of measuring phonation pressure, threshold pressure, or you know, the use of something like the straw, and figuring out what the optimum diameter is for that particular person's vocal tract. So he is looking into that, but the problem is that none of this happens quickly. You know, research is slow, and when it's minimal, which it is for the voice, it's just going to take ages for it to filter down into the more practical application that a singer can use, or a singing teacher can use, you know, with their singers. It's, in some ways, that's wonderful because it means, you know, it's the field that's wide open. But it's also problematic because it's not a very sexy field.
That's kind of true, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you don't get a lot of people researching the voice that maybe should be involved. Because I think most singers, if they're comfortable and they can get the notes they need, they're on pitch and they can get the gig, that's all they really worry about. I think that's kind of a lot of artists though. But singers in particular, more so maybe than dancers. Dancers are always looking to make sure that they're constantly fit for the job and pushing themselves further, learning a new dance or step or weird thing to do with their joints.
Taking class, yeah.
Singers traditionally don't do that as much. And in fact, you know, when you work in the contemporary field, you may encounter someone who's been in the industry for 20 or 30 years and never ever had a vocal coach, not once.
Yeah, you know, which is so interesting.
Yeah. So I would really like to change, you know, the singer's approach to their craft as well, and say, you know, you need to take more responsibility for your instrument.
Yeah. So that's actually my next question then. So, you know, I have my list of like tips that I recommend for people to do to maintain their vocal health and what to do if you start getting sick. But if someone really wants to be sure, like let's say there's someone who really hasn't done much vocal coaching, is a singer, relies on their voice a lot, and is sort of, you know, kind of how I was before I lost my voice a decade ago, where I was like, oh, this is great. I take my voice for granted and it's always going to be there for me. And I just have a really good voice, right? If someone's feeling in that boat, but has that little bit of apprehension of, what if something ever did happen? What are the steps that they can be taking to make sure that they don't wind up suddenly at the ear, nose, and throat doctor, we hope?
Well, my first step would be to go and find a vocal coach.
Yeah, okay, good. You're allowed to recommend that.
You know,
we both want to. Yeah.
because, there's a reason why athletes have coaches and trainers. Because they know that they need someone to spot them or to make sure they're staying consistent, that they're maintaining good alignment,
Mm-hmm.
that they're pushing, when they might not normally push.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's important too. Is like in our development, we need someone who can go, you know what, I think maybe we could take it a little further than that, because,
Sure.
quite often we won't push ourselves so much. So finding a really good vocal coach, I think, is important. Someone who understands the instrument, who understands the anatomy and physiology, how the voice functions, and how to take your voice from where it is and develop it further and keep
Mm-hmm.
it well maintained. So that would be one
Mm-hmm.
of my first things.
Mm-hmm.
Getting into the mindset of the fact that you do need to work at your instrument.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, there will come a point when there's a high percentage of chance that something will go wrong. And it mightn't be because you're singing incorrectly. It might be that it's just on a couple of occasions because you've been unwell or tired. Now you've brought in some new habit to try and compensate for whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. And actually, or you've sung on a sick voice and now
Mm-hmm.
you've got some edema, and then you continue to sing, and now you've actually started to create the problem. So your
Yep.
fundamental technique might be good, but you don't know how to use your voice when you need to compensate for any issues that it might be encountering, whether it's change of environment, internal
Mm-hmm.
or external, or change of requirement as well.
Mm-hmm.
You might be okay when you only do 2 or 3 gigs a week, but what happens if you suddenly have to do 5 to 6?
Right. Right.
And you might be
Yeah.
okay if if you're singing in a choir, but what happens if you have to sing solo? So
Mm-hmm.
you want to be able to adapt to these things if the opportunities come up,
Mm-hmm.
and that your voice knows what to do. I often say to people who haven't thought about it, it's like, okay, so you've decided you want to go and do the marathon. You're going to just start running. And everyone looks at me as if I'm like crazy. And it's like, but why are you doing that to your voice?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it is muscle, it is nerves, it's made up of joint, cartilage, a little bit of bone,
A little bit. Yeah.
there's it's exactly the same as the rest of your body, and in fact
Right.
it's a lot smaller, and it's got to do a much bigger job in comparison to, if you look at your limbs, your lower limbs, and what you have to how much you're spreading over for a run. There's a lot of muscle, there's quite a lot of joints and bone and everything to carry you through that run. When
Mm-hmm.
you're singing a top C or whatever it is note that you need to sing for a long sustain, you've got this tiny set of muscles to deal with that job.
Mm-hmm.
And then you've
Such a
got to
good
bring
point.
in volume as well, or expression, emotional
Mm-hmm.
expression. So that would be the other thing, is just to change your mindset. So first of all, find a good trainer, and secondly, start changing your mindset and realizing it's not okay to not look after your voice if you want to do this as a long-term thing.
Yeah. You and I are obviously on the same page, and it's part of the reason we were drawn together in the first place. But, and it's part of the reason that I created this online class, How Your Voice Works, is I really appreciate what you say about finding a vocal coach who understands the anatomy and the physiology, because I think that's the piece that was missing for me for a long time in my vocal training. And I think that it tends to, the interesting thing about our voice is that we can use metaphors and imagery to help draw the sound into different types of resonance, or engage muscles in a different way. But really, there is the possibility, like you say, the voice is made of cartilage and nerves and muscle and all sorts of tissue, and it is possible for us to actually get kind of pretty technical about what's going on when we, change the engagement of the cricothyroid muscle, and it changes our pitch, for instance. And so to understand how all of that works is, I think, very important, and was a big revelation for me as I started to heal my voice and learn more, and then ultimately teach this stuff. And, it just sort of goes to that very basic idea that I would never hire a car mechanic to fix my car who didn't know how a car was put together, right? So, and so that's also why I wouldn't ever fix my own car, because I don't actually know. I haven't studied that stuff, right? So, so just to find,
and likewise, you probably wouldn't get into a car without actually having some lessons.
Right, of course, right, yeah. And I don't necessarily have to know, and that's actually maybe a really useful metaphor for singers or vocalists to think about. I don't necessarily have to understand exactly how the engine and the transmission communicate with each other in order to understand how to shift gears in my manual car, right? But I need to at least understand enough that there is a transmission and that there is a shifting of gears that happens in order to start using the clutch and the gas pedal effectively. So, you know, that's the other part about it that's maybe important to say, is that for singers who go, oh gosh, that's not the way my brain works, I don't like science, I don't want to understand how this stuff works. You don't have to go so deeply into it as, for instance, you and I have. There are coaches who, you know, when we're good coaches, what we're going to do is translate for you and help you understand at the level that helps you and that you're interested in. So
that's right. And that's part of being a good vocal coach too, is to be able to teach at the student's need level, you know. So if they don't want to hear all the geeky stuff, you don't say it. You know enough about it that you can guide the voice accurately.
Yeah, exactly.
And there are a lot more teachers around like that nowadays.
Yes, and I think that's what's been changing.
Starting out, you know, that was hard, especially in the contemporary world. And then, I mean, it was interesting when you were talking about using metaphors and analogies and imagery and that for teaching. I don't like to use those things unless we're doing some creative stuff, because I feel, you know, for years, one of my teachers used to tell me about, it's like your voice is floating on water. And I'm like, I've got no idea what that means. But obviously it means something to you, but I was constantly chasing it.
Yeah.
And never achieving it, of course, because I didn't really understand what she meant. You know, and you hear all sorts of funny ways that teachers try to describe something which actually has a very fundamental functional approach as well. But because they don't know, you know, I've worked with teachers who've been teaching for years who have no idea about the anatomy and physiology.
Yeah.
Into a scary level, you know. And so naturally they're teaching inaccurately, and because they don't understand the function, they're actually sometimes teaching to the point where they may end up causing problems for the singer.
Yeah, and so that's an important thing to address, because, you know, a lot of the people who come through How Your Voice Works class, through my online class, are singing teachers themselves. And you obviously have a program, BAST, where you train singing teachers. And so I think also part of what happens, and that's in the same way we talked about that stigma of, you know, singers not wanting to come forward and saying I had an issue. Singing teachers especially don't want to say, I'm so ashamed, I never truly learned how the diaphragm works, right? So just to absolve all of us of that and say, look, it's okay. We get it. You probably weren't taught it, and you figured out a lot on your own, which is brilliant and wonderful. But if we actually, you know, to whatever level as a singing teacher, you're willing to keep diving in and truly approaching this like not just an artist, but also a scientist artist, right? It can be really, really helpful, because like you say, I personally, I do tend to use a lot of metaphors, and I like metaphors, but the time when a metaphor becomes problematic for me is when it's not grounded in anatomical accuracy. And I think that's the issue with a metaphor. So I've heard, you know, in the theater voice world as well, I've heard that, you know, imagine that your voice is like a pool, or we have this sort of image of, you know, the diaphragm and the body being a pool of water and the springiness of water. And I was just actually with my students playing with water balloons yesterday. So we do these things, but those are all valuable if they're grounded in some sort of anatomical accuracy. But if it's literally incorrect, then it's going to be problematic, and it's going to basically potentially cause that issue that you were talking about, where the student overcompensates and starts to recruit other things to make something that they perceive should be happening happen. And that's when we actually get into negative compensatory patterns instead of using the instrument effectively, right?
Well, the other thing too that your role is as a teacher is to figure out, how does this person learn? What's their learning style? So if they're not visual, then that might not be that useful, but that's part of your role as well, isn't it? So if you're noticing they're not responding to those kind of more visual ideas, then maybe you have to give them a kinesthetic kind of experience, or maybe they need to just hear it, hear you demonstrate it, and then they're able to do it. And that's very important as well, is that the teacher is aware that everyone has a different learning style, and that part of your role is to make sure that you're adapting your teaching to accommodate that.
Yeah. So I think we'll just say, since we're sitting here together, that there's an open door here and no judgment about, singing teachers coming in and saying, I need a refresher about the lungs, right? There's
totally
to show up and for us to all have this conversation just up levels our entire industry, right? So,
well, one thing I have learnt, and I definitely learnt this from people like Ingo Tietze, is that you never know everything. You never know enough. And the other thing is that it might be right for now, but some new kind of instrumentation will come along, or a new discovery, and suddenly what was right now is wrong. And so if you've already got that open mind of curiosity and of adaptability and just being open to the idea that, learning is actually a positive thing, then you won't feel threatened by saying, I don't know. I mean, there's many things I don't know. I still can't tell you how vibrato works,
Most people can't. Researchers are trying.
That's right, and researchers are trying. And so I'm, but that's a fundamental vocal quality that's required in the genres that I sing, and yet it's such a, there's such an air of mystery about it. But I kind of like that as well. And I mean, I've been really fortunate. I've been surrounded by different levels of teachers, but their common ground is that they're all curious and they all want to learn, and none of them feel that they know everything right now, and that they probably never will. So it's just this constant journey. And I hope that, teachers who've been teaching for a long time, who may not have already started to go down this track, actually realise that it'll be very exciting, and not only does it inform you, and make your teaching better, but your students will get excited as well. The amount of times I've gone away on a conference and my students have gone, oh, well, what did you learn this time? A little wow factor thing, because they love it. They get really stimulated by the fact that they've got a teacher that's out there constantly learning and trying out different things.
So for all of us to keep our beginner's mind and remember that we're always students, and it would get boring if we weren't anyway. So good that we are. Amazing, Lynn. Thank you so much. What a helpful conversation. Thank you.
Well, I hope it was. I mean, it's, as I said, it's a new field, performing arts medicine, and we're always looking for suggestions on how to help grow it. We've got a conference coming up in May. So the Performing Arts Medicine Masters, which I have, there's only one in the world at the moment, which is at UCL in London, at the University College London, and they're putting on a one-day conference in March.
Awesome.
And then the one that's in the States is open to anybody. You don't have to be a scientist or academic person to go along to and benefit from listening to people talk about their research, and it encompasses a wide range, not just the voice, obviously. So I think, and also the other thing I would encourage singers and teachers to understand is it's not just about singing. You've got to move. You may have to dance. You may have to act. You may have to deal with props. There's all sorts of different singing in different environments. singing for different lengths of time and all that, all these things will play into the singer's ability to sing comfortably and healthily, and not to be afraid to find somebody clinician-wise who actually cares enough to stop and listen to what's going on, rather than just accepting that you know the first person's the only one you can go to.
Yeah, good. Thank you so much, Lynn.
You're welcome.
Have a wonderful day.
You too.
Bye-bye.